They zip-tied a 13-year-old autistic boy, snatched him like prey, dumped him 180 miles away in a cage meant for animals. Why? Because he was quiet. For sitting by a lake helping a bird. What they didn't know? His father's a federal prosecutor, and this wasn't just revenge. It was an execution of justice. And now he's tearing their world apart. One file, one lie, one body at a time. But here's what no one can explain. Who was Naomi? Why did she vanish? And what's inside the cabinet they tried to burn? Stay tuned. Because once you see it, you'll understand. This HOA didn't just break the law. They built a machine to erase children. The sun hung low over Crystal Pines, bleeding amber through the trees. Elias Merrill sat cross-legged beneath a pine by the lake's edge, clutching a trembling bird in his palms. Its wing was bent unnaturally, but it didn't chirp. It just shook. Elias whispered to it softly, his voice barely louder than the breeze. "I'm going to help you, little one. You're safe now." Across the lake, Blanche Whitford stood on her balcony with a flute of champagne and a frown that could cut steel. She narrowed her eyes at the boy. Her voice crackled through her radio to the security shack below. "That child is back. Section 14A, loitering, wildlife contact, activate policy." The man on the other end didn't question. "Copy that." Elias didn't hear the golf cart approaching on the gravel path. He was too focused on wrapping the bird's wing with a ribbon he'd torn from his hoodie. The tires stopped inches from his foot. "Hey!" barked a man in a tan uniform. "Step away from the lake. You're disturbing a protected zone." Startled, Elias looked up. "It's hurt," he said. "I was helping." "You're trespassing," the guard snapped. "That's not your concern." From the balcony, Blanche raised her glass. "We don't allow wild behavior here," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "This is a restorative environment for mature residents. That includes rest from noise, chaos, and unbalanced energy." Elias blinked. "I didn't make noise." "You don't belong here," she sneered. The guard moved fast. Too fast. He yanked Elias up by the arm. The bird dropped, flapping one last time before vanishing into the brush. "No!" Elias cried. "You're violating community protocol," the guard growled. "Let's go. I live here. My grandpa, he's right over there." Blanche's smile froze. "Take him off site, just like last time." The guard dragged the boy, ignoring his cries, his protests, his pleas. Elias's feet scraped the gravel, his breath hitching into shallow, confused gasps. No one came. No one stopped them, not even the birds. The phone rang at 6:42 a.m. Louis Merrill was halfway through buttoning his shirt, coffee untouched and growing cold beside the sink. The number on his screen blinked with an out-of-state area code. Arkansas. He nearly declined. But something in his gut, a prosecutor's instinct honed from years in courtrooms and interrogation rooms, made his thumb hesitate. He answered. "Mr. Merrill?" The voice was male, soft, exhausted. "This is Tom Weaver from the North Rock Animal Rescue Center. We have your son." Louis froze. "What the hell did you just say?" "We found him near the cages around 4 a.m. He was disoriented. He said he was helping a bird, but someone took him away from a lake. He didn't have ID, just your number written on his arm in marker." Louis' heart slammed against his ribs. "Where exactly are you?" "We're off Highway 92, north of Hot Springs. 2 states away. Put him on, now." I can't. He's curled up in the back room, shaking. We gave him a blanket and some juice, but he hasn't said a word in the last 30 minutes. Louis didn't respond. He was already grabbing his keys, already dialing Christina with his other hand. "Blanche," he growled under his breath. "You vicious goddamn witch." The center was a metal trailer disguised as a facility. It smelled of bleach and sawdust and the sour remnants of old fear. Louis burst through the door like a storm. "Where's my son?" A startled woman behind the counter pointed down the hallway. "Back room. He hasn't moved." Louis didn't wait. He pushed past crates and cages until he saw a small shape in the corner. Knees to chest, head down, hoodie dirt-stained and ripped at the elbow. Elias. "Buddy." Lewis breathed, dropping to one knee. Elias, it's Dad. Elias flinched at the sound. Then his eyes flicked up and shattered open in recognition. Dad! He cried, scrambling forward, burying himself in Lewis's chest. Lewis held him so tight his hands shook. You're safe now. No one's going to take you again. I swear to God. Through broken words and shaky breaths, Elias whispered. She said I didn't belong, that I scared people. They tied my hands. The bird flew away. Lewis pulled back just enough to see his son's wrists. Red, raw, ringed with plastic burn welts. His eyes darkened. This wasn't a misunderstanding, he said coldly. This was a goddamn abduction. Back in the car, Christina sat silent, tears streaking her face. Lewis didn't speak until they crossed the state line. Then, with a voice like stone, he said, She made one mistake. Christina looked at him, hollow-eyed. She forgot who I am. He hit the gas. Blanche didn't just take his son. She declared war. And Lewis Merrill didn't lose wars. If you think this was more than just a mistake, that it was a calculated act of cruelty, press 5 in the comments and let the world know you're watching. The sun was just rising when Louis pulled into Crystal Pines. He didn't stop at the guard shack. He didn't wait for clearance. He drove straight through the open gates like he owned them, tires hissing against the cobblestone roundabout. Birds scattered, sprinklers turned mid-arc. Curtains fluttered as residents peeked from their windows. And at the top of the steps to the HOA clubhouse, she stood. Blanche Whitford, white blazer, pearl earrings, clipboard in one hand, mimosa in the other. Like it was a normal goddamn Sunday morning. Lewis slammed the car door and marched toward her, fury in every step. Blanche, he called, loud and razor-edged. She didn't flinch. She sipped her drink and smiled like a pageant queen. Well, well, she said smoothly. The father returns. You took my son. She raised an eyebrow. We relocated a behavioral disturbance. Lewis's jaw clenched. He's 13. He has autism. And he was helping a wounded animal. You zip-tied him and dumped him 2 states away like trash. Blanche stepped down one marble stair. He was upsetting the natural balance of our community. The lakefront is a protected space. Children with irregularities disrupt the tranquility some of us pay for. Lewis's voice dropped to a low, dangerous rumble. You kidnapped a minor, Blanche. That's a federal crime. I enacted a policy, she said, chin tilted. It's clearly outlined in our charter. Section 9, Article F. Residents or guests who pose ongoing discomfort may be subject to relocation. Discomfort? Lewis barked. You labeled a child a threat because he was quiet? He didn't respond when addressed, she replied curtly. He stared. He whispered to wildlife. He made people nervous. You made a community scared of a child, Lewis snarled. And I promise you, they're about to be scared of something real. Blanche's smile thinned. You'll want to be careful how you speak here, Mr. Merrill. We have legal resources, and public sympathy for troubled parents only goes so far. Lewis stepped close enough for her to smell the steel in his breath. Troubled? He spat. Lady, you have no idea what trouble looks like. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his coat and dropped it on her clipboard. Consider that your formal notice. I'm opening a federal civil rights investigation into your HOA. Effective immediately. Blanche didn't blink. You think threatening me will change anything? This place has existed long before you, and it will outlast your tantrum. Lewis leaned in. This isn't a tantrum, he said. It's the opening statement. He turned and walked away, his footfalls echoing like a gavel on granite. And for the first time in her reign, Blanche Whitford didn't have a comeback. Lewis sat in his parked SUV just outside Crystal Pines, laptop open, hotspot humming, adrenaline still burning from the encounter with Blanche. He accessed the HOA's resident portal, not public, but he'd cracked tougher systems in law school internships. A few override strings and admin code retrievals later, he was in. Security footage, meeting logs, incident reports. He scrolled furiously. His jaw locked when he found the label. Section 14A, Disturbance Reports. Non-resident minors. Click. A shaky video began to play. It was grainy, time-stamped from 3 nights ago. Elias sat under a pine, his back to the camera, cradling the bird. Silent. Still. Lewis leaned forward, eyes narrowing. From the right edge of the screen, a guard approached. Fast. Aggressive. No warning. No announcement. Just grab, zip tie, drag. The boy's form jerked as he was lifted. The bird scattered in a blur of wings. There was no sound, but Lewis felt the scream in his chest. He clicked over to a meeting video. HOA board. 6 members in beige and pastels. Blanche sat at the head, tapping a pen like a metronome. A man, elderly, anxious, spoke up. "Ma'am, about the boy last week. Elias, isn't this excessive?" Blanche didn't look at him. "We had precedent," she said flatly. "Remember Naomi Pierce, 3 summers ago? Same signs, same energy imbalance. We managed that situation." The room fell silent. "We removed her," Blanche continued. "Peacefully, efficiently. Never heard from the mother again." Louis froze. Naomi Pierce. He opened a new tab. County Records, Resident Archive. Naomi Pierce had been listed as a visitor under her grandmother's name. Age, 10. No exit record, no transfer forms, no police report. Just vanished. His blood turned to ice. He hit pause and stared at Blanche's still frame. "You managed a child?" he whispered. "You make it sound like pest control." He pulled out his phone and called Christina. "Get me the number for the federal liaison, and CPS, we've got a second victim." "You mean another child?" "I mean another name in her goddamn system," he growled. 30 minutes later, Lewis was at the front gate again, this time with a USB drive in his hand. He handed it to the guard with a steely glare. "Tell your queen," he said, "that the video's already been duplicated, time-stamped, and backed up to 3 federal contacts." "She won't care," the guard muttered. Lewis smiled coldly. "Oh, she will," he said, "because Naomi's name is going public. And this time, there's no place to hide her body." He turned away before the guard could respond, and in the distance, inside her glass castle, Blanche Whitford poured another drink. But her hand trembled. By 9:15 a.m., the storm had a badge. 3 black SUVs rolled through the gates of Crystal Pines, unmarked, uninvited, and undeniable. Residents peeked from manicured porches, their coffee cups trembling mid-sip. A 4th vehicle arrived moments later, marked Child Protective Services. Inside the clubhouse, Blanche Whitford was still in silk. Her assistant burst in, pale and breathless. "They're here." Blanche didn't look up from her crossword. "Let them in." The agents didn't knock. They fanned out across the polished tile like a tactical ballet. 2 swept through the admin offices, 1 beeline toward the server room. A federal liaison approached Blanche with a warrant and the full weight of the U.S. Constitution behind it. "You're required to comply." Blanche's smile didn't crack, but her eyes flickered. "Crystal Pines is a private community. Our records are privileged." "No," the agent replied flatly. "They're evidence." In under 10 minutes, they cracked a locked closet behind the boardroom. Inside, a metal filing cabinet labeled Youth Behavior Watch. Lewis arrived just as they pulled it open. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The agents flipped through folder after folder. Dozens of names, handwritten notes in shaky cursive, photos, surveillance timestamps, margins filled with phrases like, "Stairs too long," "Nonverbal," "May disrupt tranquility." One name repeated across several files, Naomi Pierce. A child's drawing was clipped to hers, a lopsided sun and the word help scrawled in yellow crayon. Lewis's voice was cold steel. "This isn't a neighborhood. It's a lab rat program run by a dictator in heels." Blanche finally rose, nostrils flaring. "We were protecting peace. We acted to maintain psychological safety." He stepped closer. "You targeted children. You labeled them like threats, tracked them like criminals, and disappeared them like evidence." Blanche tried to speak, but her throat caught. She reached for her mimosa, spilled it. Louis turned to the lead agent. "You want the definition of systemic abuse? Start with that cabinet." The agent nodded, and somewhere in the distance, a police radio crackled. "Prepare a unit for transport. Suspect in custody soon." Blanche gripped the table. For the first time, she looked afraid. By midday, the footage had gone viral. A still image of Naomi Pierce's file, the word "help" scribbled in yellow crayon, was everywhere, from Twitter threads to national broadcasts. Reporters swarmed the gates of Crystal Pines like locusts, cameras rolling. Mics pointed at trembling retirees who suddenly had nothing to say. But Blanche Whitford did. At exactly 3:00 p.m., she stood behind a gold-trimmed podium in the Crystal Pines ballroom, flanked by her legal team and 2 HOA board members who looked like they'd aged a decade since morning. Her voice was smooth, practiced, and poison-tipped. "This morning's intrusion into our peaceful private community was not just inappropriate, it was politically motivated," she said, staring straight into the camera. What's being painted as abuse was, in fact, a commitment to mental wellness and environmental stability for our elderly residents. She paused, long enough for the reporters to scribble. "Mr. Lewis Merrill," she continued, "has chosen to exploit a deeply personal family matter for publicity. He is not acting as a father, but as a federal prosecutor seeking attention and revenge. We grieve for the pain he claims, but we also grieve for the quiet this community has lost under his attacks." She held up a printed photo of Elias, mud-stained, wide-eyed, from the security footage. "This child was not injured," she said coldly. "He was simply out of place." Louis watched the press conference from his office, jaw locked, fingers tapping against the desk like gunfire. Christina paced behind him, furious. "She's flipping the narrative," she snapped. "She's weaponizing pity. That smug witch." "She's playing chess," Louis muttered, "trying to shift the spotlight, make me the aggressor." "You have to respond." He stood, voice low and tight. "I don't respond. I escalate." That evening, Louis walked into a town hall meeting packed with reporters, parents, and local politicians. No cameras, no notes. Just him. "I'm not here today as a prosecutor," he began. "I'm here as a father, as someone whose son was taken, bound, and discarded because someone in power decided he didn't belong." He held up a zip tie, same make, same brand, the kind they'd used on Elias. "This is what they call policy," he said, voice rising. "This is how they maintain order. By tying up children who don't speak the way they want. By erasing kids who make them uncomfortable." He locked eyes with every person in the room. "You want to know what abuse looks like?" He held up Naomi's file. "It looks like this. A child cataloged like a pest, buried in a folder, forgotten." A beat of silence. Then, applause. Louis didn't smile. He didn't need to, because Blanche had spoken to the cameras. But Louis? He'd spoken to the country. The knock came just after midnight. Louis opened the door to find a man in gray coveralls, holding his cap like it weighed 100 pounds. His eyes were bloodshot, hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Merrill?" he asked. "Name's Eddie. I work nights. Maintenance over at the clubhouse." Louis stepped aside. "Come in." Eddie hesitated. "I shouldn't be here, but after what you said about that little girl, I can't stay quiet." Louis locked the door behind him. "Start talking." Eddie pulled a small, cracked USB from his pocket. "This is from the security system. They never wiped the backup feeds. I wasn't supposed to keep it, but something about it. Jesus, I couldn't let it go." Louis plugged it into his laptop. The screen flickered. Grainy footage played. A small girl, Naomi, stood at the clubhouse steps, clutching a stuffed rabbit. She wasn't crying. She looked lost, confused. From off-screen, Blanche appeared, calm, smiling. She kneeled, whispered something. Naomi shook her head. 2 security guards stepped into frame. No uniforms, no words, just swift movements. A van. A door slammed. Then, nothing. Louis clenched his fists. "She was 10, Eddie whispered. "They said her grandmother moved, but I saw that girl come back 3 nights in a row. trying to sneak back in, crying. "Where did they take her?" Lewis asked. Eddie shook his head. "I don't know. But Blanche, she called it a reset, like sending back a broken toaster." Lewis stood, fire in his veins. "You're willing to testify?" Eddie nodded. "If it means ending this, yes." Lewis gripped his shoulder. "You just became the nail in her coffin." Back at her villa, Blanche poured herself another drink, hands steadier than before. Her phone buzzed with a private message. "He has footage, and a witness." She read it twice, then deleted it, and smiled. "Let him come," she whispered. "Let him burn." But in the darkness beyond her glass walls, justice was already lighting the match. The courtroom was packed. Parents, reporters, activists. Even HOA board members sat pale and wordless in the back row, their pastel suits now battle scars of complicity. At the center sat Blanche Whitford, spine stiff, pearls perfect, expression carved from stone. But her eyes darted, searching, calculating. For the first time, she wasn't in control. Lewis stepped to the prosecution table, folder in hand, voice steel-edged and unwavering. "This isn't just about my son," he began. "This is about power, twisted, unchecked, and used like a weapon against the voiceless." He held up the photo of Elias, arms zip-tied, eyes wide with fear. "It's about what happens when silence becomes policy, and compassion gets buried under community order." He turned to face Blanche. "You didn't just enforce rules, you created a system, one that cataloged children, labeled them dangerous, and removed them like trash." Blanche's lawyer rose. "Objection. Loaded language." "Sustained," the judge said quietly. "But noted." Lewis clicked the remote. On screen, the grainy footage of Naomi Pierce. Gasps echoed through the room as the jury watched the moment Blanche knelt beside the girl and whispered something unheard before Naomi was lifted, carried, and erased. Then Eddie took the stand, voice shaking, but firm. "She called it a reset," he said. "Said kids like that needed boundaries, that the HOA couldn't function if people brought in unbalanced elements." He looked straight at Blanche. "She told me to delete the backups. I didn't." Blanche didn't flinch, but her lips pressed tight, eyes locked forward. Lewis returned to the center of the courtroom. "You created fear, Blanche. You wrapped it in policy, and then you sold it as safety." He let the silence hang, then dropped Naomi's drawing on the table. "This is the voice you tried to erase." The defense offered nothing but noise, procedure, policy, misinterpretation. But the gallery didn't buy it. Neither did the jury. The verdict came fast. Guilty on all counts. Kidnapping, civil rights violations, endangerment of a minor, conspiracy to suppress evidence. Blanche sat frozen as the judge read her sentence. 15 years, no parole, immediate custody. Still, she tried one last word. "I was protecting—" Lewis stood, cutting her off. "You were hiding, behind fences, titles, and rules you made to keep yourself clean while the rest of us bled." He stepped back, and the bailiff took her forward. As she passed him, her voice broke into a whisper. "You think you won?" Lewis didn't blink. "I didn't win," he said. "Your victims did." The courtroom didn't erupt. It breathed. Because justice, when it finally lands, doesn't scream. It sits like thunder and lets the silence echo. The gates of Crystal Pines were gone. No more keypad. No more guard shack. No more list of who was allowed and who wasn't. Just open road. Lewis stood beneath the trees that once marked a boundary between privilege and fear. Now they marked nothing, except space reclaimed by those who were never supposed to belong. Elias stood beside him, hands tucked in his hoodie, eyes tilted upward toward the canopy. His feet shifted slightly, the gravel crunching under his sneakers. They hadn't spoken much in the weeks since the trial. Healing didn't arrive with a sentence. It came quietly, in hours without questions, in moments when no one flinched at a sudden sound. Louis didn't push. He just walked beside his son, every day, no expectations, no demands, just presence. Today, Elias had asked to come back to the lake. Not to testify, not to remember, just to listen. Now, he stood at the water's edge, still as the pines, head tilted like he was waiting for something to speak. And then, he smiled. It wasn't big, it wasn't loud, but it was real. "I hear them again," he whispered. Louis blinked. "The birds?" Elias nodded. They were quiet before, scared, but they came back. Louis felt something inside him uncoil. "That's good," he said softly. "They should be here." Elias crouched and touched the dirt where he'd once sat, where a van had come and stolen his safety. Now it was just earth again. Nothing more. No wires, no guards, no orders. Just space to breathe, to exist. "I didn't break the rules, Dad," Elias said suddenly. Louis knelt beside him. "No, you broke the silence." They sat for a while, father and son, watching the light shift across the lake. Across town, the sign for Crystal Pines had been taken down. In its place, Lake Naomi Public Reserve, dedicated to children who were once told they were too different to be heard. Louis never asked for monuments, but this one, it mattered, because Naomi's voice, once buried, was now carved in wood and stone, and carried on wind through trees that had finally learned to sing again. Elias stood, brushed dirt from his palms, and turned to his father. "Can we come back tomorrow?" Louis smiled. "Every day you want, kiddo." They walked home together. No walls, no fences, just open sky above and a path ahead. Because justice doesn't end in court, it begins at home, and freedom sounds a lot like birdsong. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it doesn't wear a badge. Sometimes it doesn't walk into courtrooms with fanfare. Sometimes it comes in the form of a quiet boy sitting by a lake, listening to the trees, holding a broken bird, and refusing to break himself. What happened in Crystal Pines wasn't a misstep. It was a mirror. A mirror held up to the polished faces of power, to the gated smiles, the HOA newsletters, the polite tyranny disguised as order. They called Elias a disruption. They called Naomi a disturbance. They built walls to silence difference, then dared to call it community. But justice, real justice, doesn't follow gates. It doesn't care about bylaws. It tears through concrete and claws its way into the light. Even if it takes a father, a file cabinet, and a janitor with a guilty conscience to make it happen. And here's the lesson that's louder than any verdict. You can silence a voice. You can bury a file. But you can't stop the truth when it decides to walk. Blanche Whitford built her power on silence, on fear, on carefully written policies designed to erase the inconvenient. She forgot one thing. The quiet ones are watching, and sometimes they fight back. Elias didn't shout. He didn't scream. He just came home, and still wanted to hear the trees. That's not just survival. That's resilience. That's victory. So here's what I want to ask you. The one watching this, sitting wherever you are, maybe a world away from Crystal Pines. Do you think justice was served? Do you believe Elias and Naomi finally got the peace they deserved? If your answer is yes, if you believe quiet kids deserve loud protection, type justice for Naomi. And if you were holding your breath during this story, if your heart cracked when you saw that zip tie, if you felt something shift when Elias finally said, "I hear the birds again," then do one small thing that makes a big difference. Like this video. Subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, but expose. And comment below, what's the one line that hit you hardest? We read every one. Because this isn't just content. This is a community of people who believe that no HOA, no title, no gate should ever be above the law. Or above empathy. So thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling. And next time someone calls a child a disruption, be the noise they didn't expect. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, listen closely, because the trees are still speaking.